Most people think that the third commandment is just about not cussing. In other words, don't take the Lord's name in vain. It's often reduced to just avoiding profanity, but that's true, but it barely scratches the surface. What if I told you that you could live your whole life without ever using God's name as a curse word and still break this commandment every single day? Today, we're uncovering something deeper. Taking the Lord's name in vain isn't just about speech. It's about how we live, what we represent, and whether our lives bring honor or shame to the name that we bear. Now, stick with me to the end because we're going to explore the most overlooked way that this commandment is violated every single day. And after we've done so, you may never look at it the same again. Welcome to the Preacher Online. Let's get to work.
The Preacher Online.
The first point I want us to see today is taking God's name in vain means bearing it falsely. The word take in Exodus 20 and verse 7 is the Hebrew word nasah. It means to lift up or to carry. This command's about more than just speech. It's about carrying God's name in vain by living a life that contradicts it. Exodus 20 and verse 7 says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." 2 Timothy 2 and verse 19 says, "Let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity." Titus 1 and verse 16 says, "They profess to know God, but in works they deny him." To call yourself a Christian is to wear God's name. But when your life is filled with sin, hypocrisy, or rebellion, you make that name meaningless to the world. You take that name in vain. Let me just try to bring it home with an illustration. Picture a man that's dressed in a full police uniform. He walks into a convenience store. The moment people see him, they feel a sense of security. That uniform represents trust and authority. But then, instead of stopping a crime, he pulls out his weapon and robs the store himself. In that moment, he doesn't just commit a crime, he betrays everything that uniform stands for. His actions are more than a personal failure. They dishonor the entire department. That badge that once stood for integrity and service is now tarnished in the public's eye. And that's what happens when someone claims the name of God but lives in hypocrisy. They wear the name of Christ, and wearing that name carries with it responsibility. When our lives contradict the message we claim to believe, it doesn't just damage our witness, it brings shame to the very name we're supposed to honor. The world watches, and when they see someone bearing God's name, acting in ways that violate his character, they're not just disappointed in the person. They begin to question the God that the person claims to serve. Now, imagine calling yourself a Christian while living in sin. People won't question you. They'll question the God you claim to represent and whose name you have taken. In Ezekiel 36, Israel had profaned God's name among the nations, not by their words, but by their lives. They were still called the people of the Lord, quote unquote, yet they lived in rebellion. God said that he would restore them, not for their sake, but for his holy name's sake. You see, God ties his reputation to his people. And when we live in hypocrisy while claiming his name, we're not just hurting ourselves, we're profaning his name. We're taking his name in vain. We also need to see that taking God's name in vain means misrepresenting his character. God's name reflects his character. To misuse it is to misrepresent who he is. Psalms 29 and verse 2 says, "Give unto the Lord the glory due his name." Romans 2 and verse 24, "The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." Paul is actually pointing to the Jewish people and probably referencing something along the lines that we had mentioned earlier that was mentioned in Ezekiel. When God's name is used to promote hatred or division or false doctrine or greed, it's bearing and it's taking God's name in vain. It's attaching God's authority to things that he actually detests. Let me give you a contemporary illustration. Nike's name was involuntarily dragged into one of the most disturbing mass suicides in American history, the tragic 1997 Heaven's Gate incident. Now, this cult, led by Marshall Applewhite, believed that A spacecraft traveling in the tail of a comet would carry their souls to a higher level of existence. Now, they were convinced that their physical bodies were merely vehicles holding them back. So all 39 members participated in a coordinated suicide inside a rented mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. They dressed in matching black shirts and sweatpants, each with purple shrouds covering their upper body. And notably, each wore identical black and white Nike Decades sneakers. The image was haunting. And when authorities arrived, rows of lifeless bodies wearing the same brand of shoes left a lasting impression on the public. Now, Nike had no connection with the group and did not endorse or supply the shoes. In fact, the company quickly discontinued the Decades model after the incident due to the unwanted association. Yet, despite having no involvement, Nike's name and logo were burned into the public's memory through photos and news footage. The same thing happens if you and I wear the name of God. We take the name of God, the name of Christ. We're called Christians, and then we live in such a way that disparages his name. God cares deeply how his name is used. He expects more than a logo life. He expects a life that reflects his truth. Jesus, in Matthew, the 23rd chapter, rebuked the Pharisees, not because of ignorance, but because of hypocrisy. They wore God's name. They appeared to be holy, but they lived with pride, and they plotted the death of Christ himself. They blocked others from truly knowing God by misrepresenting him. To wear and take his name while living for self is vanity of the highest order. We also need to see that taking God's name in vain means offering empty worship. Worship should overflow from a life aligned with God, not just lips, but life. It shouldn't just sound holy, it should look holy. In Matthew, the 15th chapter, verses 8 and verse 9, Jesus said, "These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." In Amos 5 and verse 23, God said to them, "Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not hear the melody." Why? Because they had taken God's name as his people, were worshiping him, but their lives were completely out of order. We need to realize something. God isn't moved by performance. He wants authenticity. You can sing loudly on Sunday and still take his name in vain if your life contradicts your worship. Imagine a groom standing at the altar, looking into his bride's eyes and delivering the most beautiful, heartfelt vows you've ever heard. Every word sounds sincere. He promises loyalty, devotion, and lifelong love. The guests are moved almost to the point of tears. But what they don't know is that just that morning, he was texting another woman, flirting, making plans, hiding secrets. Suddenly, those perfect vows mean nothing. The words that had been so poetic, but the heart that was behind them was divided and dishonest. The betrayal undermines everything that the groom said. That's what empty worship looks like to God. We may sing, "Oh, how I love Jesus," but if we live lives that focus on the love that we have for self, we devastate and wear the name of God and take his name in vain. Listen, it's bigger than just talking. We can have hearts that are chasing idols and living in rebellion and only a half-hearted commitment to the Lord. And as far as God's concerned, that's all just noise. God sees beyond the surface. He hears more than just what our lips say. He listens to our lives. And when our worship is filled with words but void of faithfulness, it grieves his heart and it dishonors his name. In Exodus 32, Israel made a golden calf, but claimed that they were worshiping the Lord. After Moses delayed coming down from Mount Sinai, the people grew restless and demanded that Aaron make them a god that they could see. So he fashioned a golden calf, and they declared, "This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." But what's striking is what Aaron did next. He built an altar before the idol and proclaimed a feast to the Lord. In other words, they weren't renouncing God entirely. They were trying to blend his name with their own version of worship. It was idolatry wrapped in a religious language. It was disobedience dressed up as devotion. The result? God's wrath burned hot. He told Moses they have corrupted themselves and threatened to destroy the entire nation. Moses pleaded on their behalf, and while total annihilation was averted, judgment still fell. Thousands of people died that day as a consequence of their rebellion. Their worship was not rejected because it lacked passion or celebration. It was rejected because it lacked truth and obedience. That incident stands as a sobering reminder. It's entirely possible to use God's name while dishonoring him. They thought they were worshiping Jehovah, but their actions said otherwise. God is not pleased when his name is used to endorse something he never authorized. In fact, he sees it as a violation of his holiness, a vain use of his name. Also, we need to see that taking God's name in vain means speaking without reverence. In today's world, God's name is used so casually on social media, in movies, sitcoms. It's used every day in conversations, in frustration, or in humor. In Psalms 111 and verse 9, the psalmist said, "Holy and awesome is his name." In Leviticus 22:32, God himself said, "You shall not profane my holy name." God's name isn't just a word, it's his identity. Using it carelessly is not a joke to heaven. Imagine someone shouting your wife's name every time they got angry, yelling it when they stubbed their toe or slammed the door. Then imagine them using it as a punchline of crude jokes and twisting it into sarcasm, tossing it around casually in conversations where she's not even present. Now that would sting, wouldn't it? Her name means something to you. It represents love and trust and a covenant that you've built together. Hearing it misused would feel like a personal attack, an insult to who she is and what she means to you. Now, take that feeling and amplify it to infinity. God's name is sacred. It represents his majesty, his holiness, and his eternal nature. Yet people use it every day with no thought. They curse with it. They joke with it. They invoke it for things he never approved of. It's not just irreverent. It's offensive. It's offensive to the one who deserves the deepest of reverence. Using God's name in vain is like mocking the name of someone you claim to love. It exposes a disconnection between the heart and the mouth, and God doesn't miss that. In Leviticus 24, a man in ancient Israel got mad in a fight, and in the heat of the moment, he blasphemed the name of God. The punishment was swift and severe, death by stoning. To modern ears, that sounds extreme, but it reveals something crucial. God takes his name seriously. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a direct insult to the holy character of the Creator. In a nation called to represent him, dishonoring his name was not a minor offense. It was a public act of contempt toward the God who had delivered them and dwelled among them. Now, while we're no longer under the Old Testament law, God's standard of holiness hasn't changed. He's still the same righteous and holy God, and his name is still to be honored, not handled carelessly. We may not face stoning today, but the principle remains. His name is not something to be tossed around or misused. It deserves reverence because it represents who he is. Taking God's name in vain is more than profanity. It's living a way that empties the name we claim. Now ask yourself a question. Am I living in a way that honors Christ? Do I reflect God's character, or do I distort it? Is my worship genuine, or is it just routine? Do I treat his name with reverence, or do I treat it as if it's common? The most common violation of this commandment today isn't cursing. It's claiming the name of Jesus. It's taking the name of Jesus while living in contradiction to him. The third commandment isn't just about words. It's about witness. If you carry God's name, carry it with honor. Exodus 20 and verse 7, the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Let's take his name seriously. If this episode's helped you and you see the third commandment in a new light, do a few things for us. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, it helps spread the message. and then share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. Hit the bell, turn on notifications so that every time we drop a video, you'll be able to get that. And if you want to support what we're doing here at The Preacher Online, bringing bold Bible-based teachings to the world, you can give via PayPal using the link in the description or the QR code on the screen. I want to thank you for watching. Let's carry his name with reverence, not in vain. Do not take the Lord thy God's name in vain. God bless you. I pray God blesses you with a beautiful week and opportunities to share the gospel of Christ, and we'll see you next Sunday.